Welcome to another episode of Coalition Greenwich Investor Intelligence, where we explore the latest trends and priorities of the European institutional landscape. I'm your host, Noam Cotton, a relationship manager here at Coalition Greenwich, and I'm delighted to be joined by Christopher Dunn, the head of investor management in Europe, to dive into some of the key insights from our investor survey. Christopher, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Noam.
So Christopher, what are the leading priorities for European institutions today?
So at Coalition Greenwich, we have the benefit of getting to see this information globally. And one of the first questions that we ask as part of these interviews with institutional decision makers is, sum it up, what keeps you awake at night? And of course, within Europe, you're not just looking at a single entity, you're looking at a lot of countries within it. And there's a lot of country-specific nuance once you dive in. But at the big picture, European investors are keeping a keen eye on inflation, even if there are some positive signs coming through. Another thing we're looking at is volatility. I mean, certainly given the ups and downs of the first part of this year, that's understandable. All investors are keeping an eye on their risk, but institutions certainly aren't necessarily worried about short-term volatility. Of course, yes, they are keeping an eye on it, but the bigger worry is about longer-term structural changes that are going to impact their asset allocation choices. So that's really where their focus is these days.
And so what does this all mean in terms of asset allocation? What are some of the key themes associated with that?
Yeah, so on average in Europe, again, we do this globally, and it's interesting to compare different regions. European portfolios, institutional portfolios, are some of the most conservative that we see anywhere in the world. Very heavy fixed income allocations. But again, just like my previous response, there's a considerable amount of variety when you look at the country level. Germany, just to give an example, is probably the most conservative portfolios that we track in our institutional research, the highest fixed income allocation. Whereas, very close by in the Nordics, it's a totally different picture. They are very much risk on. They're bought into equity public markets. I think they're the leader in that in the European space. So it's really a collection of very different market approaches depending on which country you're in. Another thing I'll add is this is a global trend, of course, but attitudes toward private market allocations continue to heat up in Europe. Again, taking the example of Germany, I think they've realized that the conservative portfolios that they currently have aren't going to get them to where they need to go. So they're trying to ratchet up a little bit of the risk and return to open up some more alpha potential in their portfolios while still managing an appropriate level of risk. So those are a couple of things that we're observing.
And what about ESG? Is the focus there, the same as it has been these past few years?
Yes. So sustainable investing in Europe, ESG, I think, is kind of as a term is a bit. We don't really refer to it as ESG anymore, but it's practically universal in Europe. I know that in the past couple of years, there's been some recoil or some backtracking elsewhere in the world, but in Europe, they're pretty set on a certain direction. And again, when you look at the country level, there are some differences that you can observe. The Nordics and the Netherlands tend to be leaders in terms of adoption. We're looking at 95% plus amongst the institutional community in those countries. Whereas others who would be perceived as laggards in Europe are at 85%. France and Germany kind of fall into that category. I think laggard is a bit of a tough word because 85% buy-in is pretty remarkable. So I think it just kind of cements the fact that sustainable investing in Europe is definitely here to stay, and investors take it very seriously.
Well, thank you for your insightful answers, Christopher. If you are an institutional investor or a manager and are interested in learning more about Coalition Greenwich or these insights, please be in touch, and we look forward to hearing from you.